I was elbow deep in dirt, adjusting the sprinkler heads I'd just installed that morning, when I heard the sound of a car engine creeping up behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and, of course, it was her Cynthia Mallory. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a permanent scowl etched into her face like it was carved in stone. She was the HOA vice president and a nightmare on wheels. Literally. I stood up and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Need something, Cynthia?" She leaned out her window with that patronizing tone she always used. "Stephen, those sprinklers are too close to the curb. They're technically infringing on HOA-maintained easement space." I blinked at her. "They're on my lawn. They're facing the street." "That's a problem," she said flatly, then rolled her window up and drove off. I didn't think much of it until the next morning. I had just stepped outside with my coffee when I saw it. My sprinkler heads were crushed. Not cracked. Not bent. Obliterated. The grass around them had fresh tire tracks arcing back to the street. It wasn't an accident. Someone had turned off the road, drove onto my lawn, and ran straight over them. But that wasn't the worst part. I checked my security camera footage, and there she was, Cynthia Mallory, piloting her silver Lexus like she was playing a game of sprinkler demolition derby. She even paused before turning back onto the road, like she was admiring her work. I forwarded the footage to myself immediately. I could have gone straight to the police, but I had a better idea. That night, I printed stills from the video, her car, her license plate, the exact moment her tires crushed my property, and made copies. The next morning, I stapled them to the community bulletin board outside the HOA clubhouse. Title: Vice President Mallory's Drive-By Landscaping. By noon, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. At around 3, she showed up at my door, red-faced and furious. "You think this is funny, Stephen?" she snapped. I folded my arms. "I think vandalizing private property is a crime. Want to explain why you turned your steering wheel onto my lawn?" She didn't answer, just huffed and stormed off. I knew what was coming next. She was going to try to retaliate with some bogus HOA violation. But what she didn't know was that I'd already filed a police report. And they had the footage. I just had to wait. By the end of the week, my front lawn had become a neighborhood attraction. Neighbors I barely knew slowed their walks to take in the photos I'd posted. Some chuckled. Others shook their heads. A few even thanked me for finally calling Cynthia out. I just kept tending my yard, pretending not to notice the extra foot traffic. But I was watching, and so was she. On Saturday morning, I came home from a supply run to find a pale yellow envelope taped to my front door. No postie. No name. Just a typed notice on HVA letterhead claiming I was in violation of unauthorized public display of defamatory content. It was laughable, especially since the defamatory content was security footage of her committing a misdemeanor. But what caught my eye was the fine, $750, due in 10 days. I took the notice and walked straight into my garage, opened my filing cabinet, and pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. I'd kept a full copy ever since the board tried to force residents to repaint their homes using only 3 pre-approved shades of beige. I flipped through to the enforcement section. There was no clause supporting fines for posting on community boards, especially not for content related to criminal behavior. What they'd given me was fabricated. I drove to the precinct and handed everything over: the footage, the photos, the fine notice. Officer Delaney was the one who took my report. He watched the clip in silence, leaned back in his chair, then asked, "Is this the HOA vice president?" I nodded. He raised an eyebrow, opened a drawer, and pulled out a form. "You're not the first one to report her. But you're the first one with footage. We'll be forwarding this to the DA's office." I didn't ask any questions. I didn't need to. I could feel the tide turning. That night, I installed a second camera, motion activated, and angled toward the sidewalk. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. On Monday, I got a call from Officer Delaney. The district attorney had reviewed the footage. They were pursuing charges: criminal mischief and trespassing. Misdemeanors, yes, but enough to trigger a court summons. I didn't hear from Cynthia directly after that, but I heard through the grapevine that she'd been absent from the last HOA meeting. Her Lexus hadn't moved for 3 days, and the HOA president, Greg Masters, came knocking on my door that Friday. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. His tie was crooked, and he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Stephen," he said, "we need to talk." I stepped onto the porch, but didn't invite him in. "We're hoping you'll consider retracting the footage from the bulletin board. There's some concern it's further inflaming the situation." I crossed my arms. "You mean the footage of the crime? The one the DA is now prosecuting?" He hesitated. "Look, I'll be straight with you. The HOA can't afford bad press right now. We're up for a city grant to renovate the clubhouse. This kind of publicity, it's not helpful." "So, you want me to pretend nothing happened?" I asked. "We're just asking for a little discretion." I leaned against the doorframe. "I'll take the photos down when she issues a public apology and covers the cost of the damage. And that fake fine? You're going to retract it in writing." His mouth tightened. "I'll have to talk to the rest of the board." "You do that." He left without another word. The next morning, I received an envelope in my mailbox, this time with a return address. Inside was a printed statement from the HOA board revoking the fine and acknowledging that an error was made in issuing the notice.
No apology.
No mention of Cynthia. But that was fine. I already knew where this was going. By the following Wednesday, Cynthia was served. I was outside repainting a corner fence post when the process server arrived. She opened the door in slippers, took one look at the envelope, and tried to close it again. He wedged his foot in the doorway and handed it over. "You've been served," he said, before turning on his heel. She stood there frozen, envelope dangling in her hand like it was on fire. 3 days later, her Lexus was gone. Neighbors speculated she'd gone to stay with her sister in Santa Clarita. The HOA held a special closed board session, which, according to Greg's accidentally forwarded email, was about her pending criminal case and its potential impact on the association. They even brought in an outside legal consultant. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The damage to her reputation had already been done, and the court date was set. When that day arrived, I sat in the back of the courtroom wearing a clean button-down and watching as Cynthia tried to explain her momentary lapse in judgment. Her lawyer argued that it was a misunderstanding, that she'd accidentally swerved. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked to see the footage. They played it on a small monitor. The moment where she paused right after crushing the sprinkler head sealed it. The judge didn't say much. Just found her guilty on both counts, sentenced her to 40 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution. The repair bill I submitted had been modest, under $1,000, but the judge added court fees and a probation officer check-in. After the hearing, as I walked out of the building, I saw Greg waiting by the exit. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "She's stepping down," he said without preamble. "Effective immediately." I nodded. "And the board voted to reimburse you for the sprinkler repairs. Not just the damage or installation costs, too." I raised an eyebrow. "We're trying to move forward," he added. "Start by updating your bylaws," I said. "And maybe don't let people with personal vendettas run the neighborhood." He didn't argue. That weekend, the HOA bulletin board was taken down for refurbishment. But by then, the photos had already made their rounds. Someone even laminated them and left copies in the clubhouse mailbox cubbies. I had nothing to do with that, but I wasn't in a hurry to find out who did. People treated me differently after that.
Not in a bad way.
Just better. Neighbors who used to walk past without a word now waved. A couple even came over to ask where I'd bought my sprinkler system. And when the new HOA election rolled around, I got a nomination slip in my mailbox. I didn't submit it. I'd fought one battle. That was enough for now. 2 weeks after Cynthia's conviction, the neighborhood felt lighter, like a long-standing storm had finally passed. People lingered outside a bit more, chatted across driveways, and the usual tension that came from HOA patrols had all but vanished.
But the peace didn't last.
Greg, the HOA president, sent out a Community Improvement Initiative flyer. It was dressed up with cheerful clip art and vague promises about modernizing property boundaries for safer, more efficient landscaping. But buried in the fine print on page 3 of a 5-page PDF was a clause proposing to redraw some of the easement lines, shifting them 5 feet inward on select properties. Mine was one of them. I found out when I noticed a pair of orange flags staked near my mailbox. I followed the line of them and realized they cut across my yard, right through the new sprinkler system. I walked to the edge of my property and spotted 2 men in reflective vests with clipboards standing on the sidewalk. One of them glanced up when I approached. "You guys city workers?" I asked. The shorter one shook his head. "Private surveying firm. Hired by the HOA. Just marking proposed boundary adjustments." "Proposed by who?" He pointed to a logo on his clipboard, the same one from the flyer. I didn't argue. I took photos of the flags, their equipment, and the clipboard logo. Then I emailed everything to the city zoning department. The next day, I got a call from a zoning enforcement officer named Ramona. She was direct. "Mr. Kepler, I reviewed the documents you sent. That proposed boundary shift? It's not legal. HOAs can't alter property lines without submitting a variance request, and none's been filed. Plus, boundary alterations require a 2/3 vote from the affected homeowners. You have to sign off." "No one's asked," I said. "They just showed up." "Then they're in violation," she said. "I'll be paying them a visit." By Tuesday, the flags were gone.
No palegi, no explanation.
But something felt off. I started noticing odd cars parked near my house at night. Not moving. Just idling with their lights off. I installed another camera, this one under the eaves above my garage with a clear view of the curb. 3 nights later, the footage showed a white SUV pulling up at 11:42 p.m. A man stepped out wearing a dark hoodie and walked straight to my side yard, where the utility box was. He opened the cover, fiddled for less than a minute, then ran back to the SUV and sped off. The next morning, none of my sprinklers worked. I filed a police report and handed over the footage. Officer Delaney wasn't the one who came this time. It was Detective Rios, taller, older, with a face like sandpaper and a notepad that never left his hand. "This isn't random," he said after watching the clip. "You've had problems with the HOA before?" Cynthia Mallory ran over my sprinkler system. She was vice president. He nodded slowly. "And she's no longer on the board? Stepped down after the court case. But I think she's still involved behind the scenes." He jotted something down. "We'll run the plates on that SUV. In the meantime, get a lock for that utility box." I bought a tamper-proof cover and installed it that afternoon. Later that week, Detective Rios called back. The SUV was registered to a property management company in town, one that just happened to have a long-standing contract with the HOA. But the driver wasn't an employee. He was Greg Masters' nephew, recently hired off the books as a maintenance contractor. That's when things escalated. Rios got a warrant. They searched the HOA office. What they found made Cynthia's sprinkler demolition look like child's play. Hidden in a locked cabinet were resident records, full financial data, including bank account numbers from auto-draft HOA payments.
Dozens of them.
Illegally stored. The IT forensics team found evidence of unauthorized transfers, small amounts siphoned off monthly from select accounts. Enough to go unnoticed. Combined, it added up to nearly $50,000 over 3 years. I wasn't one of the victims. But 3 of my neighbors were. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Joyce, had been struggling with overdraft fees and didn't know why. Now she did. The district attorney's office launched a fraud investigation. Greg was arrested first for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. His mugshot aired on the local news. He looked stunned, like someone who genuinely believed he'd never get caught. Cynthia wasn't far behind. Turns out, she was still listed as an unpaid consultant on internal HOA documents. The fake maintenance work, the boundary survey, the selective fines, all of it tied back to her. She had orchestrated more than just intimidation tactics. She'd been manipulating the board from the shadows, safeguarding her position by targeting residents who challenged her authority. When the Homeowners Association tried to claim plausible deniability, the state attorney general's office stepped in. They froze the HOA's accounts and appointed an independent fiduciary to manage operations until a full audit could be completed. The fallout was swift. An emergency town hall was held in the community park. For the first time, no one from the original board attended. Instead, a group of residents, including Joyce, a former city planner, and a local contractor volunteered to form a transitional oversight committee. I didn't want to get involved officially, but I did attend the town hall. Joyce walked up to me after the meeting ended. She looked steadier than she had in months. "Stephen," she said, "if you hadn't posted those photos, none of this would have unraveled. We'd still be in the dark." "I just wanted my sprinklers to work," I said. She smiled. "Well, you lit a fuse." The committee moved quickly. They hired a third-party auditing firm to comb through every HOA transaction. The results were staggering. Over $80,000 in misallocated funds, half a dozen fake vendor contracts, and multiple instances where legal threats were used to silence dissent. The community voted to dissolve the HOA's enforcement arm entirely. From now on, any changes to rules or fees would require a majority vote from all residents, not just board members. By the end of the summer, the HOA was no longer a weapon, it was a neighborhood bulletin and a landscaping schedule. As for Cynthia, she took a plea deal. 18 months probation, full restitution, and a 5-year ban from holding any position in a registered nonprofit or community organization. Greg wasn't so lucky. The wire fraud charge stuck. He got 2 years. Nobody missed them. I replaced the last of my sprinkler heads in early September. Not because they needed it, but because I wanted a clean slate, fresh start. Across the street, a group of kids were chalking hopscotch on the sidewalk. Their parents sat on lawn chairs nearby, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. I stood up, dusted my hands off, and looked around. It finally felt like a neighborhood again. The first HOA meeting under the new transitional committee was held in Joyce's backyard beneath a string of mismatched patio lights and the rustling canopy of her old oak tree.
Nova Bell. No rigida agenda.
Just folding chairs, coffee urns, and printouts of financial summaries that didn't require a law degree to interpret. I sat near the back, not because I had anything to hide, but because I was still deciding how much more I wanted to be involved. Joyce tapped a pen against her clipboard. "We've officially closed the audit. All stolen funds have been accounted for. Restitution is underway. And the county has filed civil claims on behalf of the residents who were financially impacted." A retired mechanic named Dale raised his hand. "What about the stuff the HOA sold off without permission? My wife's garden statues were taken from our yard 2 years ago. We were told they violated aesthetic continuity." "They're in storage," Joyce said. "We found records of seized items in a warehouse unit registered to the HOA's former treasurer. The county's inventorying everything. Once we verify ownership, it'll be returned." Someone exhaled loudly. A few people clapped. I didn't. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because something still felt unfinished. After the meeting, I walked up to Joyce. She was sipping from a chipped mug and scanning a spreadsheet. "I've been thinking," I said, "about that landscaping scheme. The one where they tried to push back the property lines." She looked up. "What about it?" "They didn't just hire that survey firm. I found a permit request online denied, but still filed listing my yard as a proposed common access strip for future pathway development. She blinked. You're saying they planned to convert parts of your lawn into public space? It was hidden under the guise of a beautification project. They even attached a schematic. It had benches, decorative lighting, the whole 9 yards. Joyce set down her mug. I didn't know about that. I traced the submission to a Shell LLC. Guess whose name came up as the listed manager? She didn't answer. Cynthia Mallory. Joyce's jaw tightened. That wasn't part of the audit. I didn't think it was. The next morning, I visited the county recorder's office and requested property boundary records for the entire block. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman named Felice, helped me pull the documents. Most were straightforward. But 4 parcels, including mine, had pending notations, all tied to a pending adjustment application filed 18 months earlier. Felice tapped the screen. That's not standard. Most applications expire after 12 months if they're inactive. Can I see who filed it? She printed a form. The applicant was listed as Greenway Community Improvement Initiative, LLC. I recognized the address. It matched the HOA's old mailbox. I thanked her and left, stopping at the local police substation on the way home. Detective Rios happened to be there. He didn't look surprised when I laid out the permit application. We've been tracking that LLC, he said. There's evidence it was used to funnel HOA funds into personal investments, land grabs, specifically. We're working with the State Real Estate Commission on it now. Have they connected it to Cynthia? She's not on the paperwork. But the person who notarized the application? Her cousin. Used his credentials as a licensed developer to file the request. That's a direct tie. Can I file a formal complaint as a homeowner? You can do more than that, he said. You can trigger a fraud injunction. That'll freeze the property change request and require a hearing. If you're willing to appear before the County Land Use Board, it might break the whole thing open. I agreed. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. I showed up in boots and a collared shirt, carrying every document I'd printed and highlighted. The board consisted of 5 officials, 2 of whom I recognized from zoning meetings. Cynthia wasn't there, but her cousin was. He sat with a stiff posture at the respondent's table, flanked by a real estate attorney with a tablet and 0 eye contact. I was sworn in. Then I presented everything: the speculative path designs, the forged signature on the application, mine, the LLC's link to HOA funds, and the concealed permit attempt. The room was silent except for the sound of me flipping pages. When I finished, the board requested a recess. After 15 minutes, they returned with a ruling. The application is denied on grounds of fraudulent representation and falsified consent. The matter is being referred to the district attorney's office for investigation into real estate fraud and conspiracy. The board thanks Mr. Kepler for his testimony. 2 days later, the DA filed additional charges against Cynthia and her cousin. This time, they included attempted title fraud and falsification of land documentation. Cynthia was arrested at her rental property just outside the city. Her cousin turned himself in quietly that evening. The paper ran a story about it. They used a photo of my front lawn for the article's header. HOA land grab uncovered by local resident. I didn't read the comments. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a flyer, an actual envelope, sealed with a gold embossed sticker from the county courthouse. Inside was a formal commendation letter, thanking me for demonstrating exceptional civic responsibility in the exposure and prevention of fraudulent land acquisition. I pinned it to the corkboard above my workbench, not for the recognition, but as a reminder. At the next community event, held in the reopened clubhouse now stripped of its oak paneled pretension and filled with folding tables and homemade brownies, Joyce cornered me by the punch bowl. "We're forming a permanent oversight committee," she said. "No more presidents. Just elected volunteers. Rotating terms. Checks and balances." I nodded, sipping from a paper cup. "We want you on it." "I'll help with legal filings," I said. but I'm not interested in running things. She smiled. Fair. Behind us, kids were painting birdhouses at a crafts table. Someone had set up a projector and was queuing up a movie on the clubhouse wall. The grass outside had been reseeded. The lights were softer now, less fluorescent, more welcoming. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, I stepped outside and looked down the street. No more flags. No more patrols. Just neighbors. I walked home, turned on my newly repaired sprinkler system, and watched as the water arced cleanly over the lawn.
No tire marcs. No sabotats.
Just peace. And this time it was built to last.